Hello, and welcome to Surveyor Says, the podcast from the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Our latest edition in our Future Focus series captured a conversation with Executive Director Curt Sumner and the NSPS FIG Chair, John Hohol. This past week, the annual FIG Working Week was to be held in Amsterdam, but was canceled as another victim of COVID-19. So we asked John to catch up with us on the history of NSPS with FIG. John shares about his involvement with the young surveyors worldwide and how he sees their involvement as our profession's future. Another informative discussion, so join us here on Future Focus on Surveyor Says.
Welcome, everybody, to Surveyor Says, the podcast series from NSPS. I'm Curt Sumner, your host today. And with me is John Hohol. John, many of you who are listening today will know John's name if you don't know him personally, because John has been around our organization since before, I was going to say, John, since before NSPS existed, but I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah, I joined in 1979.
Okay.
2 years before NSPS.
Yeah, I thought that might be the case, but I knew that you'd been a member for a really long time, and your association with the organization through the years has, I wouldn't say it's varied, but for a really long time you were associated with a vendor.
Right.
I'm not sure if you were associated with Bernson when you first joined, or if you joined for another reason.
No, I was with them when I joined
Yeah, when did you start with them?
in 79.
Oh, the same time.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, you and I have ever, as many times as we've sat together and had drinks together and traveled together and had been in meetings together. I'm not really sure we ever talked about what you were doing before you got involved with NSPS through Bernson.
Oh yeah, no, I was basically doing some studies. I was involved with the University of Wisconsin. I was involved in international studies, and so yeah, I basically went from the university right to Bernson. I had worked for a couple of years as a manager of a restaurant in the meantime, but it's basically from Bernson, yes. After my college career.
So dealing with surveyors might be better than running a restaurant, but the tips probably aren't as good.
Well, you really don't have any tips if you're a manager.
Well, I guess that's true. That's probably true. So how about your relationship then, since Bernson is basically an international company? Were they already connected with FIG at the time, or how did that work?
No, they didn't. They weren't aware of FIG, and the first instance was in 1981.
And did you make that connection with FIG just as part of your job there, or for?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, 1981 was the first FIG meeting I attended. It was the FIG Congress in Montreux, Switzerland.
So had you already by that time developed a relationship within ACSM?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was back when. You remember the old guy that wrote a book?
Yeah.
So it was funny because whenever I would talk to him, he would always reminisce about how much he used to come to Madison enjoying doing ice boating on the lakes in the winter. And I could never picture him doing ice boating at his age. And then, of course, Bill Radwinski was executive director for a while as well. So that's where I really got involved with ACSM, when Rad was there.
Right. And then, so your connection, then you would go to FIG conferences, obviously. And were you part of an ACSM team, or were you representing
Yeah.
Burnson, or both?
Both. I've been part of the ACSM delegation since 1986. That was when the Congress was in Toronto. And the head of the delegation back then was Jerry Ives.
Yes. So obviously you have a long history with FIG, and you have a long history with us as an organization, ACSM and or NSPS,
Right.
as we've gone through our different iterations. One of the things that has happened in the not too distant past was the formation of a foundation within FIG that you had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, the foundation came out of Australia. It was established after the FIG Congress in Melbourne. It was actually governed by the Australians, and in 2000 they transferred the foundation over completely to FIG, and so the foundation came into existence in 2001 under FIG. Holger Magel was president of the foundation, and that was when Bob Foster was FIG president. And Holger became FIG president after Bob, and so in 2003 I've been on the foundation board since 2001, since it was switched over to the FIG, and Holger put me as president of the foundation in 2003, and I've been president since.
And the foundation, does it get its resources through donations, or how does that work?
Yes, it's totally 100% donations. There's a number of different ways. So we have some different vendors that have provided pretty good donations, grants. Over the years, the primary one is Trimble. Esri also provided a nice grant at its beginning, but most of the donations come through a stipend that's part of the registration fee. Mm-hmm. When you go to an FIG conference. I think it depends. Depends on the type of conference, but typically it's 10 euros. With each registration fee goes to the foundation, as well as we get a donation from the foundation dinner that is hosted every year as well.
Except this year, right?
Or last year.
Or last year, that's true.
Because in Hanoi, they do not have a dinner. The Vietnamese hosted a big concert at the Opera Center, so there was no dinner, but it was pretty impressive. I mean, everybody really enjoyed it. So, and the foundation over the years has provided quite a number of grants in supporting different endeavors, both academic and to young surveyors and so on. Since they started providing grants in 2002, the foundation has given out about $355,000 in grants. So it's been fairly substantial over the years.
Yeah, that's pretty substantial amount of money to over that period of time, for sure.
Yeah, 132 grants, and it's to recipients in 68 countries, so it's a pretty global distribution.
So you mentioned the young surveyors. I would assume that perhaps grants had a lot to do with them being successful in their early years, or even maybe past that.
Yeah, I would say definitely the foundation has helped the young surveyors along quite a bit. And some people understand who the young surveyors are, and maybe they don't understand the foundations of it. But back in 2006, at the Congress in Munich, the Young Surveyors became a working group of Commission 1, and for a few years you were involved with Commission 1,
Right.
which is professional practice and standards. So it was working group, I believe, 1.2, and was just called Young Surveyors. And in 2009, at the working week in Eilat, Israel, it became the Young Surveyors Network. They had their first conference in 2012 at the working week in Rome. And at the time, the president of FIG, Shihai, talked to me about having a young surveyors conference in North America. And as you recall, in 2014, we had the first FIG Young Surveyors Conference in conjunction with the CLSA and the Nevada Association in San Diego. And that's basically where the NSPS Young Surveyors were born.
I see. I'm just making some notes as we go here for my report. Now, I think when that occurred in California, that was the year we had our business meetings there at basically the same time.
Correct.
And so I guess that's maybe sort of the beginnings of NSPS participation. But I also remember a meeting in Minnesota, which may have been the next winter. I don't remember.
Yeah, no, that was 2 years later. That was in 2016. Okay. Yeah, that was the second meeting, and that's where we had speakers like Bryn Fosberg from Trimble and right. Ken Moyman, who was president of WICA North America at the time, and so on. So yeah, and then of course in 2018, the last meeting was in College Park in conjunction with the Maryland Society.
Right. And having said all that, one might draw the conclusion that a lot of Young Surveyor Network activities have been happening in the United States. The reality is they're active all over the world, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. In fact, this past weekend, because the working week was canceled in Amsterdam because of COVID-19, the Young Surveyors decided to hold a virtual conference. And because of its global nature, they actually had 4 separate sessions. They had one covering the Asia Pacific, one covering Europe, Africa, one covering North America, and one covering Latin America. And the Latin American conference was the first time they had a Young Surveyors conference in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
And I put down some numbers here, which I thought was really impressive. So over the 4 sessions, there were 30 presenters, a total of 2,572 registrations, and there were actually 1,197 that actually participated. So about 50% of the people that had actually registered participated. So it was a pretty good turnout when you have almost 1,200 young surveyors participating in these 4 sessions.
Yeah, this is a question that may be impossible to answer because I certainly don't know the answer to it, but maybe it's more of a perspective that I'd like to get from you. And it seems to me that in the U.S., there is a really good deal of interest in Young Surveyors Network amongst young surveyors in the United States, and they're doing a lot of things. I'm not as sure about whether or not all of the things that the Young Surveyors Network is doing is being, I don't want to say incorporated with, but connected to perhaps NSPS in the sense of looking at that next generation of leaders. Because as you know, NSPS leadership, I guess historically has been, I'm going to say old, but certainly not necessarily seasoned. Young surveyors all the time. And seasoned,
yes.
Yeah, seasoned. And oftentimes when people come to NSPS, they have, as leaders, as directors or whatever, oftentimes they've already been through all the chairs in their state, maybe in a regional organization. So it's not, quote, young surveyors in the sense we think of them now. So I guess I'm curious about your perspective on, and hopefully this is going to be a positive thought, that the young surveyors working in conjunction with NSPS will ensure strong leadership moving forward, and have that perspective from the young surveyors as well as the ones of us who are more seasoned, as you say. Because I know there's concern in surveying altogether at the local, state, national level, all about the future of the profession and the future of our organizations as they stand and how they might be affected by social media and all those kind of things. So I'm just kind of interested in your sort of overview of that from your position of connection to both NSPS state societies and Young Surveyors Network, FIG. Just, are you seeing anything there that strikes you?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. In the last several NSPS Young Surveyors meetings, which I always try to attend, the meeting portion besides the conference, quite a few of the attendees are very active in their state associations, and for many of them, they have also established, a young surveyor chapter within their state association, and they're very involved in the various committees at the state level, and I just see this as a ladder for them to go up to the national level as well. And at the FIG level, it's very similar. It's really phenomenal in that how many young surveyors now are active within FIG and even beyond their national associations. And one thing that's really nice to see both at the NSPS and FIG level is how many women are actively involved, not only participating but leading as well. So I mean, I think that's a good sign. That's a good sign as well.
Do you think, and again, these are total opinions on your part, not asking for
Sure.
edicts necessarily, but you have like I said, you have a good overall view of what we're doing, because sometimes it's easier to do that if you're not right in the middle of the grinding and the meetup, So
Right.
I just wonder, from your perspective and talking to the young surveyors as much as you do and hearing their perspectives and the way they think, the way they operate, do you foresee the approach of a future NSPS down the road 10 years from now, or whatever the number of years might be, when the leadership gravitates more toward the younger group? Do you think they're going to be as interested in the advocacy side of what we do, affecting legislation and regulation, that kind of thing? And of course, for NSPS, that's in particular on the national level. Do you sense that interest from that group as well?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. They're already very involved, and one of the key things is that one of the thing that the young surveyors are looking at, not only the young surveyors, but even the students, is mentoring, and it's really important for them to be able to connect with the so-called seasoned professors, professionals both at the state and national level. And one of the positive things that I see is with the student competition is students, get the opportunity to not only interact with each other, but also interact with the leadership, not only at the national level, but within their state associations. One thing that I remember that really came to mind was a few years ago, I convinced the Italians Italian National Association for a number of years had been sponsoring a 8-day course on surveying and topography for young surveyors, and it was held in Europe, and they would invite 50 young surveyors from around the world. And I said, well, I don't see any young surveyors from North America. And they said, well, why don't you submit, a couple? And so that's when Amanda Aldred and I'm sorry, yeah,
Amanda
and
Askren.
Asker, yes, and Adam Schleicher from Wisconsin. Amanda was from Washington, attended. And the one thing that they brought out was, they had 8 days of learning anything and everything to do about surveying, hydrography, archaeological surveying. I mean, a lot of different areas that they would never be exposed to. But the most important thing they thought was to be able to interact and connect and network with their peers and from around the world. So, I mean, you had 50 young surveyors from all over the world getting together and learning from each other, and then also learning not only from the professors teaching the courses, but the other surveyors, the seasoned surveyors that were there helping out.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important aspect of what we're talking about here today, because just from my view of things and personal experience, those kind of things, what I'm seeing now is this international interaction when people are still really young and not after we've been through business and leadership and organizations and all those kind of things. It's like, I don't know that I went out of the country very much until I started doing this job, and I was basically old when I did that, or most people would have thought I was. So I just think there's a good possibility that interaction internationally with young surveyors from America, with young surveyors from everywhere else in the world, I believe that's going to make an even stronger profession all across the board for an FIG situation, but just from bolstering surveying in general.
Oh, absolutely, because I mean, we're familiar with things like slide rules. They deal with Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and LinkedIn and so on, and none of those have any type of borders. So I mean, it's easy to be able to deal with people around the world. As an example, the FIG Young Surveyors Facebook group has over 12,000 members around the world. So I mean, it's really easy to communicate, and quite often, there's people asking questions about something or other, and it's easy for somebody to help out from a different culture, a different language, and a different environment. So I mean, it really is amazing. I mean, it is a global world, and it's really shrinking because everybody is able to participate.
One of the things that, I don't know if this came through the World Bank in discussions with somebody, or it might have been a guy I had on the radio show once who was doing work kind of around the world. But obviously there are different ways of doing things in different parts of the world, although we're all working under the same underlying premise, but just the difference in the way things get done. And I know there oftentimes is efforts to go into lesser developed countries and help people with land tenure systems and all those kind of things. Seems to me that this new collaboration, so to speak, might facilitate that even more and be a help for people when they want it and need it.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not only at the association level, but it's also involving vendors and academic community and so on. So no, everything pulls together really well. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I've asked you a bunch of questions, and I know we're supposed to keep these sessions relatively short, but I want to leave this open for you to share anything that's on your mind or concepts you have, or even talk a little bit about the important nature of NSPS and its relationship to FIG and the world.
Well, I guess the way I look at it is that NSPS provides a resource to the surveying community in the U.S. It basically works dealing with congressional issues and at the international level also with FIG, because FIG is very involved with, like you had mentioned, the World Bank. The United Nations are very involved with quite a number of areas in the UN, like UGGIM, UNGGIM, UN Habitat, and so on. And I guess the big thing is that the more that we can meet and network and get together, we can understand what everybody is doing with globally. And it's the same profession, and everybody has the same challenges. Maybe a different culture or different language, but everybody's dealing with the same issues. And in many ways, by being able to connect with these different surveyors from around the world, you're able to learn things and not have to maybe reinvent the wheel from time to time, and to share things. I remember one of the things when we were in Hong Kong at the working week, how many people wanted to tap your brain when you're dealing with Commission 1, professional standards and practice. And that's just it. I mean, it's important that we discuss things and share things, and that's only going to make things better and help the profession.
Yeah, I think so too. And one of the things that I've been able to get involved in because of the FIG connection really is that group that still works on what are known as international property management, international property measurement standards. And going into that, my first thought was, well, what's the deal here? What are we talking about, measurement standards? Well, I soon found out we weren't talking about how we measured. We were talking about what we measured.
Right.
And that the differences in different parts of the world, if you were measuring a condo, for example, in one place you'd be measuring to one point and somewhere else you'd be measuring to another. So the whole idea was, let's get some commonality in the terminology that we're talking about in this world that we live in now, where everything is so transient and opportunities to work in different places occur. So the idea was to have some uniform standards on what we're measuring, not necessarily how we're measuring.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I noticed, especially when we had the recession, a lot of surveyors were looking for jobs, and one of the things that I was trying to do was to explain to them is that just because there was a recession here, there were parts in the world where they had a big shortage of surveyors. Australia was a good example. And I mean, by getting involved and networking and making friends and connections through organizations like FIG, and we're talking about FIG, which is the International Federation of Surveyors, which FIG doesn't sound like that, but it comes from the French. But anyway, it's that's just it. I mean, being able to have these connections to not only better the profession but also better yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So before we go, any other perspective you want to share or advice or to help our audience get a grasp of this connection we're talking about and why it's important?
Well, I guess the only thing I can say is be sure to put on your calendar 2023, because for the first time since 2002, we'll actually have an FIG conference in the U.S. It'll be in Orlando, and it's going to be a great opportunity to be able to network and communicate and share things with the global surveying community.
Yeah, and for the audience's information, that will also be in conjunction, or I guess I should say, we will be in conjunction with the FIG conference, because we'll be doing our meetings
Correct.
there too.
Right.
So hopefully that doesn't inhibit us too much from participating in the conference itself, because sometimes we get pretty intense in our meeting sessions. So
Right.
People need to hang around a bit to be part of the FIG conference. But I do have to say, I haven't been to even a fraction as many as you have, but each time I've gone, I've learned something and made good friends that
absolutely.
you can communicate
Absolutely.
with from around the world. So I do think it's a great exercise for all of us. So I guess this probably won't go to the recording. All I can say is I hope that our recording today actually occurred. It it's supposed to have. So we'll see how that works out when we're all said and done. But I do appreciate you being with me today, John, and sharing your
Sure.
perspectives and helping our members and our audience have a better perspective themselves on our relationship to FIG and the world in general. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, you bet. Thank you, Curt.
You've been listening to Future Focus here on the Surveyor Says podcast. We would like to thank John Hohol, the NSPS FIG Chair, for sharing his wealth of information on surveying worldwide. He is a tireless contributor to the Young Surveyors Network, so we appreciate his time for sharing his knowledge of international surveyors. More Table A Talk with Curt Sumner and Gary Kent are being scheduled, so send your questions for Gary to info@nsps.us.com and put Table A Talk in the subject line. Upcoming episodes will feature more legislative issues with UAV developments and ongoing discussions about legato and GNSS interruptions. So, remember to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. And watch our website, nsps.us.com, for information on future episodes. And remember, it's a great day to be a surveyor.